Victor had sent Harmony away. He needed time to think. Too much had happened too quickly, and between the guilt plaguing his conscience and the realization that he was far worse off than he had initially assumed, Victor had to level his own mind. Not once in their little adventure so far had Victor ever stumbled. He'd met some close calls, of course, but nothing that he'd never been able to overcome. But in this case, there was simply no way he could do so. And in his unstable and befuddled state, it took Victor quite a while to properly analyze what he needed to do. He didn't have Dorna with him to help him deal with locks and traps, nor to help him on the front lines. He had lost her with his own folly, foolishness, and he would have to deal with that guilt for the rest of his life. However, he also had a responsibility now, both to Dorna and Drogon. He had to put away the guilt, the shame, and the pain, and he had to focus, or he would never get this done, and millions more could die. And he would not allow that. It was due to this that Victor would finally, after several long moments of contemplation, realize what he had to do. He had sent Harmony away not just because he had needed time to focus, but because he realized that having her was too much of a drawback. If bulldozing his way through with raw power would not work, he had to find an alternative. His spells were not functioning against the golems, so he would have to find a way around them. However, the slave collar posed a different issue. It had to be removed, and he could not take it off himself. His magic was not potent enough. Which meant he had to find a way to destroy the golems, or trick the Asabi into understanding or thinking that he had done it himself already. The first concept of tricking the lizard man had been a fruitless endeavor. He had attempted such, but the lizard had certain sensors through runes and mystic scrying that ensured he could not trick him. Due to this, he was limited to destroying the golems if he ever wanted to get free and to stop Undertide. This meant he had to find a different way of thinking. If brute forcing his way through these scenarios wasn't going to work, he had to choose a different option. And that is when the whispers from his cloak reminded him of something. It was true, he did not have any spells of invisibility or other forms of stealth memorized, but he didn't need to, because his cloak was just as potent, if not more so. But that only gave him a way to work around the golems. And so, he would shift his focus. The golem, when he had attacked it, had given an automated message telling him to go to the Golem Emporium. Now, Victor initially had no way of knowing exactly where this could be. However, with a bit of magic scrying and a few ingredients purchased from the rather greedy lizardman, he had managed it. There was a control rod of some sort of substantial power, but it was to the east. And that was through the golem, something that he had panicked beforehand because he simply couldn't defeat it through blunt power. Now that he had realized he didn't have to, the trick was only one thing. He had to find this rod and either use it to destroy the golems or to take control of them. It depended entirely on how their creator had worked the magic. Either way, he had a solution, and with his mind level and putting his guilt aside for now, Victor began his new journey alone. His options would be short-lived, but if he could at least make it through this, perhaps he could at least alleviate his conscience slightly. And so, lifting his hand to his cloak and calling upon its power, he felt himself shift into invisibility. He had no way of knowing how long the enchantment would last, and so he would move as quickly and silently as he could. And as predicted, the golem could not sense him. A powerful creation, surely, but nothing he couldn't avoid. Insects likely having invaded this place after having fallen. And spiders. Luckily, it appeared none of them could sense him just yet, but he was not about to linger and test it. Slipping through quickly and closing it behind him, this is the room where he had sensed it. And oddly, a stone golem wandered about the room. First, however, he had other things he wanted to do. Certainly, the golem appeared to be lumbering and benevolent at the moment, but there was no way in hell he was going to trust that after seeing the others. The constant waves of debris from the caved-in ceiling and Undertide flying once more reminded him of his short time as well. The door was not locked, but this had been the source, and now it was clear what it had been. Quickly he sifted inside and closed the door behind him. A sarcophagus. Likely, this was the tomb of the man that had made them. Scattered about the sarcophagus are the rusted remains of various sorts of clockwork. When you bend down to touch one, it crumbles into dust. Too much time had passed, it would seem. A pity. Victor would have loved to find time to study the man's work at some point and create his own golem. But Victor had a plan, and it required whatever lay within this coffin. It was locked, but now that his mind was level, Victor was able to recall that he had means of dealing with locks without his friend Dorna. Blowing into the enchanted windpipes. It, of course, ended his invisibility, but that was fine. The potent enchantment still rendered him half concealed. Inside was gold, an enchanted lyre? That's a word that the narrator doesn't know what the hell to do with. A wise and powerful bard in the Moonshades named Voltaire created the first of these instruments, using them to test and reward the student of his bardic college. Others have since copied the designs, keeping the name Voltaire gave them to honor him. This 8-string masterwork mandolin can be played to cast haste, remove curse, and sound burst, each once per day. Unfortunately, Victor can't use it. It would actually be quite useful. And here was the control rod, or rather, control ring? The Golem Maker's Ring. The golems of Undertide have long outlived their maker. There was a time, however, when he was still called upon to repair his mighty creations. This is the ring he used to still them, that he might tinker with them unharmed. Exactly what Victor was after. A control rod. In this case, it would still them, apparently. Replacing his ring of resistance for now with it, and sliding it into place, he gave it a test with a pulse of his arcane energies, and was satisfied with it. Now, however, came something else. Would this golem remain benevolent? Well, he supposed he would find out. Perhaps if he was quick, the golem would not notice. It was quite aged. For now, everything seemed fine. And if that was so, it was worth testing it now that he was armed with the ring. Voices? It's been long since I've heard voices. And the Mythal, that too has been gone too long. At last life returns to Undertide. Interesting. So it's still relatively workable, despite his age. That spoke volumes about the man's skill. What are you? Actually, As much as Victor is curious about such things, the purpose right now is to find Herodes. Yeah, I think he's very one-tracked at the moment. Oop, that didn't work out now, did it? I hunt a Medusa named Herodes. A Medusa? I have not seen one of those since my earliest days. Why did she come to Undrentide? Tell me that, and maybe I can tell you where she might have gone. She wanted to rule the city and make it fly again. Ah, then she must be the one who reactivated the Mythal. It is controlled from the Temple of the Winds at the city's heart. So that is where you will find her. But now that the Mythal is restored, the temple will be encased in glowing walls through which you shall have no passage. It is safer that way. There must be a way in. There has to be an emergency cell. Oof. Narrator doesn't know what he's talking about. There must be a way in. There has to be some sort of failsafe. There we go. Said it right that time. 3 winds were hidden in 3 great buildings of Undrentide. If there was an emergency, the owners could bring them to the Ark that rests at the temple's base. Only then would the temple open. Which of the great buildings? I assume I passed one. I briefly glanced at it, though I was a little bit more preoccupied with avoiding the arachnids. The wise wind was hidden in the great library. In their own tower, the arcanists hid the darker wind, and the clerics housed the dead wind within the bodies of the crypt. Those were the 3. So he had 3 winds, quote unquote, defined. Whether or not they were arcane winds in the literal sense or something more, they would have to find out, he supposed. Or he supposed, actually, in this case, he would have to find out. A pity. He was still in the mindset that Dorno was next to him. What can you tell me about the rest of the city? I need information if I'm going to properly, well, locate the Mythal and the Medusa. No reason to inform the golem that he was going to tear down his home once more. The city, while it flew, spread out in all directions. Pick one, and I will tell you what was there. The directions might have changed when we fell, but their associations are still the same. What lay north in that case? To the north was the great library, home to 1,000 tomes. People came from all over the empire to read the works of the authors of Undrentide. And the east? To the east? To the east there was nothing, only the quarters of slaves and servants. They got the early sun to wake them for their duties. The south? To those in the south lived in the shadows of the Arcanist Tower. There they trained for centuries, many of them becoming liches before the fall. Too arrogant they were, too arrogant by far. I see. And to the west? He didn't like the sound of liches by any means. Not exactly a foe he wanted to try to deal with on top of the golems. The crypts loomed in the western quarter. They could not spread out or dig below, so as more died, they built upward, corpses in the sky. Oh, that sounded pleasant. As well as with the previous affiliations of Jurgle, Victor felt like he was dealing with the dead a bit more than he liked. He felt the shiver of amusement pass through the cloak on his shoulders. Victor didn't exactly count the elven crypt as something that disturbed him to such a degree. And finally, what is at the city's center? I believe that's the direction that I came from. At the heart of the city rose the Temple of the Winds. From there all Undrentide's power was controlled, as there were kept the fragile Mythalar. But now that the Mythal is restored, the temple will be encased in glowing walls, through which you shall have no passage. It is safer that way. Well, it's clearly still quite defective. It's repeating words that it's already spoken. Forgive me, your speech is hard to follow. Once, when I was younger, I was more eloquent, but that was long ago, and I've grown old. Little by little, I am fading. What do you know about the Mythal that you keep speaking of? Clearly it's connected to the Mythalar in some way. The Mythal. Someone has repaired the Mythalar atop the Temple of the Winds and reactivated the Mythal after so long. A part of me is excited, another part is afraid. And what exactly are the Mythalar? They are the crystals from which the Mythal receives its strength. They capture the magic of all the world and put it in the hands of who controls them. Destroy the Mythalar and you destroy the Mythal. The Temple of the Winds? Or, yes, what is the Mythal capable of? For a strong Mythal, there are no bounds upon its power. Some have placed new stars within the sky, or changed the spinning of the spheres. This one is weak, but even now I feel it growing. He must be speaking of the vibrations and arcane energy that Victor feels rising from the floor. Almost like water surrounding him. The concept of how strong they can become is more than worrying. Something like that in the hands of a evil arcanist Medusa is not exactly a good idea. It's encouraging him that he needs to move on even more quickly. It's not hard to imagine what frightens it about the Mythal's return. Same with the excitement. Its home is being risen from the ashes, but at the same time, that much power could clearly go wrong. It's certainly done it before, obviously. That's how the city fell. What is the Temple of the Winds, exactly? Yes, from the center of Undrentide rose the great temple. There the Arch-Wizards controlled the Mythal and were controlled by it in turn. But now that the Mythal is restored, the temple will be encased in glowing walls through which you shall have no passage. It is safer that way. And that's the third time it's repeated itself. Well, this is clearly the Golem Emporium. Goodbye. Hopefully it doesn't trigger anything. No, it doesn't. Well, now Victor had a choice. Part of him wanted to leave the golem as it was, alone, but this was clearly the weakest of the golems he had met so far, and honestly, he felt bad for it. Its master was long dead, it was slowly deteriorating, and he needed to know that this ring worked properly. And if it went wrong, this would be the easiest one to escape from. So first he braced himself and would focus what little mental power he had left, leveling up. Let's see, spell penetration would be great, and then after that we'll go for spell focus most likely. These three are neat. Empower spell and maximize spell especially are really nice, but because I've taken them so late, not really about it. So we'll take spell penetration for now, and that helps against spell resistance. That still won't be enough to help deal with the golems, unfortunately, but it's still something. Later on it will help, especially when combined with spell focus. Spell focus is the much more important thing. Firebrand will be great, because that's a spell that will actually affect the golems, though there's still a chance it will not do damage. And a Dire Bear or Spell Mantle. I think the Spell Mantle would be better. Yeah, let's do that for now. And of course Harmony as per usual. Okay. The only thing I'm going to change here is Firebrands instead of Cold of Cone. Not Cone of Cold. Not that it really matters right now. Oh, because unfortunately, that's nice, but it won't help me in this. Let's just take another Ice Storm. Yeah. Unfortunately, that will not help me too much in these fights. That's okay. Victor has a plan. He had spent the time and money to buy more Alchemist's fire from the lizard. His hope was, though how effective it was going to be was still unknown, but the hope was that using the ring he could stall the creature enough that he could then kill it using the Alchemist fire. An incredibly expensive way to go about it, but if it worked, it would be something that he could then rely on to remove these creatures. And he's going to wait for the for the golem to make its rounds until it's further away, just because he doesn't know what is going to happen with this ring. And of course, the reason that the Alchemist Fire will hopefully work is because golems were designed to be immune to spells, not necessarily alchemical creations. Of course, it could simply have the reduction needed that it doesn't matter. They were about to find out, though. First, let's try the ring, lifting his hand and summoning up the control's power and releasing an arcane burst, to find that it was more than a little effective.
That's it for you. Take that.
Immensely effective. Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. If you enjoy my videos and don't want to miss out on future content, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification button. If you'd like to support me on a more personal level, offer recommendations, chat with me, or vote on future series, then consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Thank you once again for all your support, and I can't wait to see you in the next chapter of our story.